My 316 stainless steel hardware has arrived, so it's time to mount some doors and drawers. I've never done this before, so I don't know if what I'm doing is right, but what I've done is I've clamped two pieces of wood here to hold this thing in place. I'm going to get a consistent gap all the way around it, put the hinge down, and screw it on. Using this wedge to kind of move things around and judge it, I basically just say, hey, I can go that far down there, a little bit less over here, so I can stick it over here and twist it slightly, and then pick a consistent amount. And I'm mostly getting with the top edge here and this edge, kind of eyeballing this edge to that edge. So once I'm happy with it, I'm going to put the hinge down and screw it in place. I did this bottom left corner and the top right corner. That will fix this guy in place. Now I just have to hit the exact center of all the rest of the holes. Tighten these up just by hand, don't want to strip any of those. And now we have a door. The hard part is getting the latching mechanism to work properly. So this is the little piece of matching metal that hits into that hooky thing. And it's going to be mounted at this level down here. The goal will be to hold the door in place flush, just like that, when it's mounted. So I'm going to have a block of wood under here to mount it. But as you can see here, you know, it bridges that gap, and there's a little bit left here. So what my goal is to mount this guy such that that little end of this triangle is basically in line with the end of this door. So it doesn't stick out a lot. I don't want it hitting that piece of wood. You know, I don't want it sticking out a whole bunch when I'm opening and closing the door. But even there, it will be enough to hit this guy, snap under it, and then catch in place. And then, of course, I'll have to get a block of wood on the underside of this. And this guy has holes that go up and down, so I can mount it in there and adjust it just slightly. Now, I might just take a piece of wood, probably cedar, and mount it like this permanently and cut a slot or hole in it. And have the mounting hardware in there, so this thing goes into the mounting hardware, but still have more board on either side to really give this guy a backing to keep it from trying to push inside. And also that'll fill up the back of this gap, so any wind-blown water won't really be able to go too far into the gap, it'll go straight down. So I'm still considering what I'm mounting on the back of this piece of wood here. This line here is the center point vertically. And then I'm mostly just going to eyeball this thing. You know, I don't want that guy sticking past my door much, but I want it very close. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to do something like that. And so the center of this guy is about there. And so that's where I'm going to be drilling my pilot hole. And that is just a pilot hole to get the very tip of this guy indexed in there. And so this here is a 1.5. You could try to do this with a hand drill, but since I have a drill press, there's no way I'm going to try to do it with a hand drill because I want this hole to be mostly straight and level as I can get it. So that means I need to take off at least one side of this hinge to take this door over to my drill press. This is where these holes are on the side here, so you can see with that rounded corner and the pretty thin piano hinge there, those are pretty close to the edge. I mean, I could have gotten away with like a 1-inch strip here instead of the whole board, but I figured I might as well use the whole board. Here is secured. I have my safety goggles on. I have the workpiece clamped down, such a way that if it were to get caught, it's still going to spin that way. And the pilot hole is lined up just about perfectly with the tip of my long drill bit there. We're going to cut halfway through with the hole saw, enough so that the pilot drill will go all the way through. We're going to flip it over, align this, and cut the other side through. That's going to make both sides of the hole look pretty neat. I don't really need to do that because the back is hidden behind the door, but it's good practice. And besides, I'm not sure how this fiberglass is going to cut, if it's going to make a super neat hole or a super messy hole, so we're going to find out. Well, that looks pretty neat to me. Let's flip it over and see what happens. Flip to the opposite side. This hole nicely indexes in. We're going to cut halfway through again. Hopefully those will line up very nicely. And you can stop as soon as you feel it cut through and the plug comes right out through there. And looking through the hole, you can see, with the exception of a little bit of sawdust, that cut beautifully. So you can see the plug here. You can see where I drilled halfway through one way and turned it around, drilled halfway through the other way, so that kind of rough edge is hidden in the middle of the hole. You can also kind of see the layers, the super thin layers of fiberglass at either side of the piece of cedar board. Alright, the 1.5 inch hole worked perfectly. Mounted in there without having to move anything or sand anything. The catch is just slightly below the edge of the cabinet there, but I think it's going to work just fine because this guy here will be mounting, you know, something like that, and that will go in and then catch on it. Now in this door, I have that guy to clamp this to support that side. Don't have anything to nicely clamp stuff to here, so I'd improvise. I just put a clamp right there. Then I'm going to set this guy up at approximately the right height. If I want to adjust it down, I can slide that just slightly so it looks about right. When mounting this piece, I have the unique advantage that the bottom of my cabinet is open and I can work through there. Normally you'd have to measure where you wanted this thing and do it probably based on the face that's touching the back of the door. I just propped up the door where I wanted it, and then I'm going to put this in the center and then mark these two holes, hopefully without moving things too much. I purchased this M4 hardware specifically for the drawer pulls, or the drawer slides, but they are also going to work for mounting these guys. It's close, but that's going to fit there nicely. And I have fender washers and the nuts for the other side. This is all 3/16 stainless steel. Alright, this one here was nice and easy to mount because that little latch cast will mount right against this side of fiberglass, and so I can just snap that in there. This side over here is going to be a little trickier because that guy is going to have to be mounted to something that doesn't exist, an air right here. So I think what I'm going to be doing is probably be putting a piece of wood down below this guy to mount that into. And since I'm putting a piece of wood there anyways, I might as well have it stick out a bit, except for that little area where the latch is going to be, so that this board here will be held at the appropriate height because it's up against that backer board. Because cedar is not a terribly strong wood, I have cut 2 layers of fiberglass cloth. We're going to wrap 3 sides of this. We're going to basically wrap around here, that's why I made these rounded, and we're just going to drape it down there. So we're going to do a single layup to get 2 layers and call it good. Alright, so after 25 to 30 minutes of sanding, this top is looking nice and right angled. I'm going to be coating pretty much every surface here with epoxy, using it as a paint to smooth out the woven fiberglass cloth texture. I'll be doing that a couple at a time. I'll probably be turning it on a side like this, and I'll do that vertical surface and this vertical surface. So I'm going to have to do the 4 sides and then the back here as well. So it'll take me a couple of days to get all that done. If you were trying to go fast, you'd do the whole outside all at once, but then you risk streaks coming down here, and I don't want to deal with that. So I'm just going to do, 4 or 5 days to do that. One of the days I'll be using excess epoxy to glue these guys into there to get my doors all finished. Because these guys are going to be clamped to things really close to each other, and also because I'm going to be using epoxy to paint my drawer on several different days, I'm going to do these one at a time. So I'm going to do this one and then let it dry, and then I'll work on the other one, just so my clamps don't interfere with each other. I could probably figure out a way to clamp them both at the same time, but I'm going to be having epoxy out multiple days in a row, so I might as well just do one at a time. I've positioned this board where I want it. You might notice it's up a little bit from this board. That's because the bottom of the door, when it folds down, will match up with this flush. And I have it out enough so it'll catch, but not so far out that when I put this guy in place, the thing can't snap past it. So that's where it's going to be. You just have to get it back in that exact position when I put glue on it. Now that I have that stop in place, the only thing left to do is install the latch, so it will latch like this guy over here. These are number 6 wood screws, 1 inch long. They're 316 stainless steel, although this latch here is probably not stainless steel. At least the screws won't rust. Right, I haven't tightened these screws down, so this guy can move up and down a bit. Looks like actually the lowest position is going to work pretty well there. I have 2 latching doors on the pontoon boat bench seat. Next up, the drawer. I have here my drawer kind of dry fit in place. This is the drawer front that I'm going to be putting on the drawer after I get all the drawer slides put in place. And the only potential issue I have right now is that I've made it just slightly wider than it needs to be, and you can see that the friction is actually holding these drawer slides and the entire drawer body in place there. Since it's fiberglass, it's kind of difficult to make it smaller. I can obviously sand and trim down an area, but then I'm going to be cutting mostly through the fiberglass into the foam. So I'm probably going to mount it first, get the screw holes right, and then try sliding it in and out and see how much friction it has. If it has too much friction, at that point I will take the drawer slides off and start trimming things down and making it narrower as we go through. So I'm putting the center of this guy 11 1/4 inches from the top of the drawer. That's going to give me a 1/2 inch clearance on the top of the drawer. And I'm going down from the front face of this drawer 1 1/8 inch. And that's going to give me 3/4 of an inch clearance on the top of this for my front facing board. So the mark up here is where the top of this drawer pull will be. That hole is actually 1 inch lower. Because my work surface is level, I can just use this level to set this guy up to something that will be approximately level. Alright, let's see if this thing is anywhere near where it's supposed to be. Alright, that edge looks correct. Now just to install the other drawer slide. Well, I ran into one wrinkle already. So I want to mount this thing down here to be similar to the other side, but I can't because if I do that, this thing hits. So I'm going to have to mount it up here so that it goes through, and that means the drawer slide on this side of the drawer is going to be mounted higher than the one on that side of the drawer. Now I have some room to do that with, so I'm going to do that, but it means all my measurements for each side will be different. So this particular piece of foam and fiberglass isn't exactly straight there. You can see the gap here. Not even certain it's level-ish. Yeah, that's not too bad. So that's pretty good. That matches up with the other side. So I'm going to have to get a little bit longer screw for this big gap here. But other than that, I just have to put the corresponding drawer slide on this side over here. And I just have to measure the appropriate amount here to get this guy flush. And that might be sticking out above my drawer a little bit, but I can cut a notch in the foam for the front face of the drawer front pretty easily if I need to. So this drawer body is a bit too wide, so this may not go in. And if it does go in, it's probably going to be pretty tight sliding in and out. But I'm going to try it before I start chopping things down, because I'm really hoping it'll just work. Well, all my measurements for the drawer slides are appropriate. This is flush. This will be flush once I get it built into that thing there. The only problem is this measurement is a little bit off, probably just an eighth to a quarter inch, but that's what really matters. And so this drawer is not going to be pulling up and down easily. It does move, but it's a little too tight. So a lot of the binding appears to be happening up on this upper edge of that drawer rail, or drawer slide. And on this side, I do have this thing where I had to mount it higher so it would avoid that. I'm thinking I'm going to chop into this section here and just chop a little section out of that wood so that this guy can tilt that way just slightly, and I'll see if that reduces the pressure on the other side that's keeping it from moving up and down nicely. And if it does that, I might not have to widen the entire thing. Right, my initial cutter on this is going to be using one of these following router bits, trim bits, that has a bearing on the bottom, and that will allow me to go in and trim out this section, and it will only go in as far as this fiberglass down here. So it's going to get rid of a section of that to make it in line with this fiberglass, and all I have to worry about is the left to right. I don't have to worry about how far in as much. I chopped a little section off there so this fits in a little bit more, but it's still binding. And as you can see down here, there's still quite a gap in there, so I could move it in a little more. So I think I might chop a little deeper section out there. I had to cut into that piece of wood quite a bit to get this guy to sit vertically, but I think that's going to give me just enough room so this drawer will slide relatively smoothly. So unfortunately, these 20mm screws that I have are just a little bit too short to go through there and have a washer and a nut put on them, even after I cut this thing down to make this whole thing flat. So I'm waiting a day or two for the 25mm versions, and I'm going to put epoxy resin all on this part I chopped in to at least coat that wood grain and kind of fill in this crack and stuff. I'm going to try to not get too much in these holes. If I get a little bit in, it's no big deal. I'll drill it out again. Alright, I coated that little area. Then I did another coat on this thing and that thing over there, and then I just kind of did a lot of these interior pieces in here and a little bit on the top there. I figure I might as well, if I have extra epoxy, paint these interior pieces. They're cedar, but a coat of epoxy will give you a little bit of more protection from bugs and liquids and just water going in and out and so forth. Alright, I'm still waiting on the extra longer machine screws for over there, so I'm going to put another painting of epoxy on that guy. I'm going to epoxy this fiberglass cloth to the back of my drawer front. I'm only going to do one layer on the back here. I'll do 2 layers on the front, but this guy's going to be pushed up against the drawer and glued to it, so I figure the epoxy and fiberglass cloth in the drawer combined with this bit here will be plenty. I do have, you know, a ½ inch hanging off each side, so this is mostly for that ½ inch on the side, but it's hard to do, you know, a ring around the outside without doing the center, so I might as well just do the whole thing. I mixed up 90 grams of epoxy resin, and I feel that was just about perfect for this one layer layup here, and a little bit extra to dab in that wood area over there. I had very little left over, just a little bit of dripping off the edges. So this is kind of interesting. I have this knot hole here on the cedar. I hadn't noticed that it was cracked, but it was. And you can see here that my thin viscosity epoxy actually ran all the way through that cedar board in those cracks. You can see just a tiny bit there and a little bit more here and here came all the way through. Now this knot hole here didn't have quite the same thing happening. You can see just a tiny little bit at the edges there. But yeah, so it looks like my epoxy, just by laying it on the top here, actually strengthened some of those knot holes a bit. So I measured how thick this was, and 20 millimeters works just fine on that guy, but it's not working on some of my other ones, so I had to go off and buy 25 millimeters. And since I was buying those, I figured I might as well go get some 30 millimeters just in case the next size up. So now I have a good selection of lengths for various different thicknesses of fiberglass. So that 5 millimeters is the difference between being able to put a nut, or maybe a nut, on that guy versus being able to get a good sized washer and nut on that guy. I think maybe 22.5 would have been perfect, but they don't come in those sizes. I don't actually have a wrench small enough for these guys, but for these small nuts I've found that I can just hold them with a pair of pliers. This is the moment of truth. I'm going to call that good enough. It's a little bit tighter than I would have liked, but I can pull it in and out without yanking on it too much. So this inner drawer rail, not that one, but this one right here, scrapes as it goes by this little bit right here. And since I've already carved out a humongous chunk out of that side to make this guy flat, I am going to do the same thing here, carve just a little cutout there, just so it's not touching. And that cutout really didn't even go into the round over here, it was just that straight flat inside there. So you can still see, there's just a paper's clearance there, but now it's not going to scrape. So when I paint that, hopefully the paint won't get all scraped. Now normally both your drawer rails would be low enough that they wouldn't touch your front of your drawer. But because of the way my setup was, I had to put this one down up a little higher so it's going to touch that guy. So I need to chop out a little bit here. But I found that the single layer of fiberglass cuts pretty well with a razor knife, and then of course the foam underneath it isn't really difficult to cut once you get that fiberglass. So I'm just going to cut this section out here. And that's what's going to let this front sit properly down like that. Well, that could have gone better. Did fine on the wood. Here, I'd forgotten I'd trimmed out a piece and that my following bit was going to hit that, and so it basically bzzz into this before I could really do much about it. So I meant for that to be straight there and just kind of trimmed in the back, but now it's going to be a little bit curvy. I might fill that in with some epoxy and kind of get it straighter, but it's going to be kind of body filler Bondo type epoxy work if I do that. I have this little nick here, a couple little nicks here where there was epoxy on the foam and it just didn't cut very nicely. I'll probably just kind of sand all that down a little bit. So, not perfect, but not horrible. I'm going to hit it with a sander, and then I'll put a couple of layers of fiberglass cloth down, put in some epoxy putty, and do a little extra work for myself. Well, it would have been better if I hadn't messed up with the router, but it's not bad now. So I have that thing sanded down, and I still have the notch for this guy. An added benefit of having to put Bondo on it, I actually made it go out just a little bit more to cover up that drawer pull a little bit, or the rail, the drawer rail, or drawer slide, whatever you want to call it. So now I'm ready to put a couple layers of fiberglass cloth on the top of my drawer front. Got a layer of fiberglass. I just chopped the corners so I can fold it down and kind of fold it over. I'm not going to worry too much about that fold. I'm going to be using 100 grams of epoxy resin here. That'll probably be enough to go around the edges everywhere. If I have any extra left over, I'm going to coat these guys to try to get some of the Bondo off of them. This is interesting in a don't try to replicate this kind of way. I have essentially a bubble of glass cloth that's delaminated and not connected to the wood and the foam behind it. So it's a little disappointing, but nothing sanding and a little bit of Bondo won't fix. Here, after I sanded it, you can see this piece popped out. And it basically wasn't laminated to the underlying material right there. I'm thinking that this crack between the foam and the board had crevices, and the epoxy basically through capillary action got pulled down into those crevices, and that's what happened there. Filling little holes like that is a perfect job for Bondo. You could use epoxy and glass beads, but it would take forever to dry. I don't have forever because I want to put another layer of cloth on this thing. That's much more Bondo than I need to mix for this. But I'm probably not going to be using this for much else. And I forgot to knead the tube again, so you're supposed to knead the tube first so you don't get liquid like that. Also, the fact that the tube is old isn't helping. I'm mixing on a disposable surface because it will need to be disposed. And we're trying to get to a consistency and color that is smooth and even and matches the color of my application spreader here, which is pretty much there except for this little edge. Okay, let's do this. And as you can see, I mixed up much more Bondo than I needed. But there's nothing wrong with going a little bit extra, other than wastage. Alright, and it's starting to kick. So I'm done with the Bondo at this point. 20 minutes later, we're ready to knock these guys flat. I used a little bit of excess epoxy just to paint over that wood there. Alright, this layup is complete. I made sure not to leave any excess epoxy on top, and I poured epoxy in a line over that middle seam there, extra. So hopefully this is the second layer, and hopefully it will not have problems like I had with the first layer. Second layer of fiberglass does not have any issues. So I'm just going to sand it a little bit. Then I can mount this guy to the front of that drawer. I'm going to be mounting one of these latches to the top of this guy. And because I only have about a ½ inch here, that means I'm going to have to cut out a little bit of a notch, circular shaped, for the back side, like so, to fit in. So my current plan is to glue the front face of this drawer on, and then I will drill with a hole saw the appropriate size through, and then when I go to the other side I will use a larger hole saw from the back just through this drawer part, and then use the regular size hole saw through the drawer front part, and I think that'll work okay. We'll find out when I do it. This is going to be the final resting place for the drawer front. You can see how it kind of disguises the roundedness of the bottom of the drawer. It also is slightly tilted, so this side is not as tall as that side, so that this gap is close to the same as that gap. You can see here this is close to the bottom of the drawer. That actually overhangs the bottom of the drawer just slightly. To stick the drawer front to the drawer, I'm going to be mixing up about probably 80-90 grams of resin. I'm going to be mixing in milled glass fiber for a little bit of strength and bulk, and then glass balloons for a lot of bulk. And I'm basically going to be making a thin paste. I want it to be not very runny, so that when I put it between the drawer and the door front, it won't run around the sides and drip. But also, it will move and conform a little bit between the high and low places on the drawer especially. And that will let me tilt just slightly the drawer front and get it in line with the edges as close as possible, and kind of fill in space between the two surfaces to get the glue joint pretty good. I mean, it's not going to be super structural. The weight of the drawer is being held by the drawer rails, but it does need to be strong enough so that the latch on the top of the drawer front will engage with the bench seat and keep the drawer from going in or out, or mostly out, because it's not going to go in anymore. I'm totally eyeballing this, but I figure I'm going to do 1 scoop of the milled fiber from here, and then probably 2 scoops of the glass balloons from this guy. And that's going to make a decent volume there. So that's going to be plenty of volume, I think. The question is, will 90 grams of resin be enough for that? And I think it will be. Looking at the relative size and volume of 90 grams of resin, I don't think that's going to be too much. But I poured about probably 60 grams in there initially. Alright, so we got kind of cookie dough consistency there. I'm going to put some more in. I'm going to put the rest in. So that's all 90 grams. I'm thinking for those 3 scoops, about 120 would have given you a runny, well, not runny, but less doughy than this consistency. I still think that's going to work for me, though. It's thick enough I'm going to have to rip the bag open to get it out and use a spoon. But I think that's going to hold pretty well. It's a little drier than I would have liked. I'm hoping this is going to work. Now I'm going to slide this back and forth a little bit to work that paste into all the grooves. Alright, now we want to get the gap here nice and even. So I'm using this guy to make sure I have a gap that's mostly consistent left to right, top to bottom. Check the drawer moves freely, that's good. And then we will put weight. And I am putting these weights on the three corners such that it will kind of keep pressure based on how flush they are. So I'm putting a lot of weight on this side because this corner is a little bit proud. And this guy, I'm just kind of balancing it so it's going to fall down on it, but not a whole bunch of weight. That one up at the front is nice and flush there. Alright, and now we hope there's enough epoxy mixed in with filler to actually stick these two things together. And after I'm done, I'm going to pull the drawer out and I'll put in some more along this bottom gap because there's this big rounded gap here. So I'll mix up a little bit of runnier stuff and kind of push it in that bottom gap. And I'll take a look at the front and see what I think on the front. I might fill in some gaps on the front and the sides too. We'll see how that looks after I get the drawer out. This is about the only application where lead acid batteries have an advantage over lithium batteries. So I have the same latching hardware for the drawer as I do for the doors, and the only real difference is that there's a drawer in the drawer front, and so I'm going to have to put this through both of those, but it's not thick enough to go through both of those. So what I'm going to have to do is drill the regular sized hole through the front and then drill a bigger hole that will contain everything through the back halfway in through that drawer face. So 1.5 will fit this guy here, and the backing plate will go inside of a 2. So I'm going to do 1.5 through the front all the way through to the back of the front face, and then the 2-inch will go through a portion of the drawer that's back there so that this guy and this hook here can go around the drawer bit. Okay, I have my center mark there, which is 13.5 from both sides, so it's centered on the drawer face, and I have it 1 1/8 in here is where the center will be, and that'll put this guy about the same place I have it for the doors. So you can see here how that epoxy putty allowed me to have the gap being different widths at different places here to get the drawer front aligned with the front face of the bench seat. The initial pilot hole I'm going to do by hand and only go in about a 1/2 inch or so. And that's just to index my hole saw drill pit into the right spot. Luckily for me, my drawer is big enough to fit over the table on the drill press here. Now I need to do the inside from the other side, the little bit there, to keep that clean, but I also have to do the bigger piece as well, indexing through that hole. So I need that hole to have gone all the way through, and I don't know if it has or not. I'll take this off and find out, and if not, I'll have to take the hole saw off and drill that hole all the way through. Alright, and as you can see, that hole did not go through all the way, and there's no way I'm going to be able to get this thing on the drill press and drill through here, so I'm going to have to do that by hand, but I do need this indexing hole to come through. So I took the hole saw off, so we're just indexing this all the way through. I hope that was far enough. If not, I might need to actually raise the bench. Nope, didn't go through. Okay, I could feel it go through the fiberglass there. Okay, I have the 2-inch hole saw on. We're going to follow that indexing hole down until we cut through the front of the drawer. Then we're going to switch over to the 1.5-inch hole saw and complete the cut that's in the drawer front for the actual hardware. And because it's inside the drawer, I have to use the electric drill by hand and try to get this thing mostly level. Alright, I saw a little bit of sawdust there, but this doesn't appear to be off. So it appears that this little bit is stuck with that epoxy putty to the drawer front face. So I'm going to switch to the smaller hole saw and pull that out. If I'd been smart, I wouldn't have put any epoxy putty here so I could take these two pieces out separately. I might still be able to... it's moving around, but I can't get it out easily, so let's just go through here. Okay. So there we have two size holes, one through the front face and a larger one through the actual drawer in the back. So with the plug that came out, you can see how when I was on the drill press I went down almost all the way through the wood. And then over here I came through the foam and went through the wood there, and it snapped off right here a little bit. So inside of the hole there's a little bit of roughness, but on both outside and inside faces there's no roughness. And that's how that piece of hardware is going to fit in the drawer. So that latch is designed to snap into this catch, and you can see here that the inner part of the drawer will interfere with that catch, so I'm going to use a saw and just kind of straighten these corners out and get rid of these two corner pieces so I can have this catch that will go through and pop that thing, and it'll get caught in underneath this latch. I think that looks very nice. So this catch here, when the drawer closes, we'll push that back, snap in place, and capture the drawer. And you can see I have a decent sized area for that catch to go in, so if I mount it just slightly off, it'll still be fine. Now of course I have exposed foam in this area here and a little bit of exposed wood there. So I'm going to be putting some thin epoxy putty around the edges of the drawer. I'm also going to paint some epoxy resin over this area here and let that cure before I put the hardware on. I mean, I'm going to have to paint it all before I put the hardware on permanently anyways. Alright, I'm putting epoxy on here for two reasons. One is because I have exposed wood and exposed foam. So I want to put epoxy on so that water doesn't seep into the wood, and so the foam doesn't start, having little pieces fall off, because foam isn't very strong on its own. Also, I need to make sure that the drawer front, which has my hardware attached to it, is firmly attached to the drawer body, because as people are going to be using the hardware to yank open the drawer. And so especially right around where this hardware is, I want to have some good connections. And it looked pretty good when I drilled through it. There was the epoxy putty that I'd put in there before, and it looked like it was connecting pretty good. I mean, I lifted the entire drawer up using the drawer front face. But to reinforce that, I'm going to put more epoxy in this general area, and I'm going to be mixing glass beads in with what's left of this resin and pouring it all along the top here, and then I'll do a couple more batches later and turn on the side and go to the sides and so forth. So you can see I'm kind of coating the foam and inside the hole where the wood is exposed, and all the edges to kind of tie those pieces of fiberglass I drilled through into the wood and so forth. And then I'm going to put a little bit and drizzle it down this crack. And it's just going to go down until it finds an area where there's some of this epoxy putty that I have in previously. So that's going to help connect the front face to the drawer front. And then I'm going to mix up a little bit of glass beads in here to make it a little thicker so it won't run down, and do just a little fillet between the top here. It'll smooth out this transition and make it so that the front face is visually a little more connected to the drawer, because when I have the drawer open, people will be able to see this connection, and I don't want there to be a big gap here. I'm also painting a little bit extra on top of here just to hide some of that weave pattern. Because I have some epoxy I can use as paint, I might as well do a layer since I'm here. And I'm spilling epoxy paint over the front middle bit, I might as well do the whole front bit. Just have to make sure it's thin enough there won't be any runs. So I'm doing this quite thinly. It's thicker than I wanted, but I'll probably go with it and use it as a gap filler here anyway. It's going to get messy. That's all there is to say about that. Luckily, this stuff sands off really nicely. So after it gets messy, I can sand most of this mess off. Right, that's looking pretty good. That ties the front face into the drawer pretty nicely. I need to be able to mount this guy about there. So I'm going to take a piece of wood about that wide and glue it down here. Today's epoxy adventure will be taking this piece for the latch and putting 2 layers of fiberglass over the 2 sides and the top. I'm also going to be mixing up glass balloons with a little bit of milled fiber for strength into a kind of a slurry or paste and sticking it down in this gap here to both fill in the gap and also to kind of adhere this front to the drawer body a little better. I mean, it seems to be stuck on pretty darn well, but I figure filling in that gap will strengthen things quite a bit.